Hi, folks. Excuse me, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the comments that were reported in, I think it was Time magazine, but certainly a major American media outlet or magazine outlet, where in an interview with President Trump, Trump was mentioned that he would take steps, or his administration would take steps to combat anti-whiteism. So the leftist, globalist controlled propaganda media have gone into a meltdown over this, for obvious reasons. White people are the only holdouts, are the people that are the most suffering the most under globalization, and particularly are holdouts on things like wanting democracy to prevail, the rule of law, due legal process, and these sort of things. And we must always remember and keep this in mind: clearly codified law is sovereign. When it's clearly codified and administered impartially, it's sovereign. It's above ideological interests, and the globalists are very determined to impose ideology all across the Western world. Therefore, law must be subordinate to the ideology, and as long as white people want to cling to this idea of the law is sovereign, then they must be removed or neutralized. and anti-whiteism really is part of that wider story of neutralizing white people across the Western world. So, which I think the globalists are fairly close to achieving, and the resources that are put into it are truly enormous. Now, the rich white people or the wealthy white people are those who perceive, often wrongly, by the way, that they won't suffer from globalization, or are being rewarded, like the director of diversity who could only make $40,000 a year in the real world, but is being paid $500,000 a year to get rid of all the white people in the place. Then they're the beneficiaries. But as soon as their usefulness is worn out, they'll be gone. A bit like the way the communist revolution is used by the Bolsheviks. As soon as the Bolsheviks had seized power, they killed off most of those people who'd been such useful placard wavers and street soldiers and so on. And this is what will happen to a lot of these people, the college kids that wave placards for climate change. Their usefulness will pass, and then they're looking at a future where they'll be literally taken out back and shot when they're no longer of any use. Now, anti-whiteism, I see a lot of it, and again, being a well-traveled sort of business guy, and really part of the group that should really be in the pro-globalization camp, but its contradictions and its failings are such that I've never supported the globalization agenda, and have always been, well, as soon as I recognised what was going on, have always been questioning it, initially questioning, then opposing it, as I'm doing through this video now. So anti-whiteism, I see anti-whiteism, all over the place. Now, exactly how you define the anti-whiteism, depending on the situation, may vary a little bit. But for example, the Australian Medical Association, as I best understand it, has stopped training local white people as doctors, and then importing as many doctors as they can from the third world. And they're giving them, they seem to, certainly by my experience at least, they're little better than medical orderlies in terms of their competence. Now, there is a variance of competence within the range, but they've really just got a tick box that they tick off. If headache, give aspirin, and they just go down the list. And I mean, you could get a donkey to do that. So the quality of people that are being brought in, why have they stopped training white people? Why is it that affirmative action is insisting there must? So you bring in a whole bunch of people that can't get jobs on merit, and then you make laws to force businesses, universities, public service departments to hire people that can't get jobs in any form of merit. Now, I sort of came across those jobs that are being given to these people, though, it means that white people are not getting jobs. Now, if that's not anti-whiteism, what is? What else could it be? If it was extra jobs being created that were being given to these people who otherwise couldn't get jobs, then that would be different. And in some cases, in the public service, they do create extra jobs just to employ the masses of Indians and folks from the Indian subcontinent being brought in that otherwise couldn't get jobs. So when you see these sort of practices going on and you realize that white people are being denied jobs, or white people are having to meet a higher standard, or that these other people have to meet a much lower standard, whether it's in education, whether it's in university, high school, graduating through employment, and so on and so forth, then so well, hold on a minute. That means I have to work harder to get either the same reward or even a lesser reward than someone who is just getting waved through only because they're black or brown, or a minority group of some sort. So anti-whiteism is clearly an issue. Now, the anti-whiteism thing affects women less because women still fall into the minority category. So it disproportionately affects straight white males, particularly if you're, say, a Christian or something like that as well. So anti-whiteism is a thing, and whether it's indirect or direct, it doesn't really matter. When you look at all the social ills that are supposed to exist, such as violence against women, domestic violence, they always portray it as a middle-class, straight white male problem. If we can control straight white males, then that's it. We've got it. In the same with ideological law that's being applied in all over the place now, whether it's in rape cases, divorce cases, it doesn't matter. The ideological application of law is always wants to go after the straight white male. And that's where they're energized and excited, and that's where the ideological fanatics are going. Same with climate change thing. They treat it as a crime committed by straight white males. Working class straight white males, ironically, who've got a much smaller footprint than rich straight white males. And the wealthy straight white males seem to be given a free pass on this, but there's not many of them. So now, behavioral differences are, of course, a big thing between races, white and non-white and so on, but that's not looked at. The whites are just being put, this is by the globalist propaganda machine, they're just being put in a basket and said, you're all bad, and we have to replace you, we have to humiliate you, we have to undermine you, we have to do everything, portray you in a negative light at every turn. For example, if there's a crime that's committed by a straight white male, it's front page, it's the name, the photograph, it's right out up there. Whereas, if a much worse crime is committed by a minority group, then it's obscured, it's a much lesser story, and often it's the case the various government authorities, globalist controlled government authorities, will try and have the story killed off altogether, so people don't know. In the United States, it's a case where a recent black immigrant grabbed a white baby out of a stroller and threw it off the top floor of a shopping galleria district, shopping centre, and other than the local paper, it was buried very quickly, and yet where there's a case of a white man involved, then they drag the story out for days, if not months or even years, to milk it for as much as they can get out of it. Some years ago, I hired one. It's the first sort of black, North American, black guy that I hired. I was getting leaned on by the board of directors who wanted to go a little bit woke, and why haven't you employ? I was like the EVP at this company. Why haven't you employed black guys and or more minorities? So, and the problem was that minorities at that time, mass migration hadn't really sort of kicked off. So there weren't that many, in fact, none. It was rare you'd get an applicant. And if you did get an applicant, they'd come from a place where they could barely speak English. So, what use was that? So anyway, there's this North American guy's from somewhere in New York, and he applied, and and really just because I was getting leaned on, I gave him the job. Actually almost created a job for him. Now it became, he's a well-dressed guy. He was like a fit dude. I worked out at the gym, and but his behavior, he was an incredibly self-destructive guy, and his behavior was doing, he would come into work late, and he was always getting himself in financial trouble, was always spending way much more money than was coming in the door, and lived a lifestyle that his income and the income with his wife couldn't possibly sustain. Debt collectors coming after him. It was just insane. But the guy didn't see why he should really do any work. He would come in, and he was a folksy, chatty sort of guy in a lot of ways, and he'd tell jokes and tell stories. He was always getting in fights on the weekend. So he's coming to work on Monday with like lumps on his face where he'd had a fight, and he was claiming that there were these people who were disrespecting him, and he had to take them outside and teach them a lesson. And wow, you're kidding me, aren't you? Every weekend. It's so huge chip on the shoulder, these sorts of things, and the same people that were constantly pestering me to hire a black people were changed because they wanted me to get rid of him. He would turn up for work at instead of 9 o'clock. He'd turn up for work at 9:15, and he'd be dressed in gym gear. And so I assume he'd come from the gym. And you go, no, he hadn't actually been to the gym yet. And so he didn't have time to have a shower. So he was going to go to the gym and have a shower. Then he'd come back, and he might be ready to start work around 10:30 or so. And to him, that was like, so what? That's sort of how it is. And what's your problem? And me trying to impress upon him that actually everyone else has to start work at 9 o'clock, and so do you. That's white man's timing. That's white man's clock. And why do I have to work to a white man's clock? So being held to account and held to the same standard, he treated as tantamount to racism. And this was where I first came across this sort of white privilege. He didn't use that term, but he said, well, you white guys, you're used to turning up for work on time. You're used to behaving sensibly. You're used to being careful with money. You're used to working hard, and you're used to all those things. I'm a black guy. I'm not used to it. And because I'm not used to it, why should I have to go along with it just because you guys do? And because he's always getting in financial trouble and spending too much, he must have seriously flunked mathematics at high school. But I would sit down with him because I thought, now he's here, I might as well try do everything I can to make it work. Now he's here, and so on. So I'd sit down with him and go through his budget and the money he was spending, and say, well, look, you're spending $100 a day on eating out. So that's that's came to over $3,000 last month. 3,000? It can't be 3,000. It can't be, because it's only $100 a day. How can it be 3,000 if it's only $100 a day? So you'd say, well, there are 30 days in the month, and you're doing it every day. So 30 times 100 equals. Well, I don't understand. Add it up again. That was the sort of childlike, infantile level of comprehension that this guy had, and he was a guy like in his late 20s, early 30s. So it didn't work out, and he had to go. And he was, he sort of knew it was coming, but I could think, why didn't you? And I asked him, why didn't you change your behaviour when you could see the consequences of refusing to change your behaviour? And he looked, I don't know, just because the white boys want me to do this, why should I do it? just because the white boys say so. And this comes to the white privilege. He believed that white people were capable of this sort of behaviour that suited them. And because he was being forced to behave that way, then why should he be? That's your way of behaving. Why should it be mine? But I still want all the benefits that white people get for all this good behaviour. But I don't think I should have to behave that way. And then the idea of privileges is the white people derive certain privileges from such disciplined behaviour. And because I can't behave that way, I get less benefits, the black guy says. Therefore, the white people must have a privilege or have a privilege, and that's unfair. If I'm only making, if I'm suffering because of my bad behaviour, then white people, whether they behave well or not, should also suffer similarly. Or, given that white people have so much, they should share it with me, regardless of whether or not I contribute to the same extent they do. So this is really the essence of how, certainly the foot soldiers and the activists, the low IQ black academics and so on, the idea that they push about white privilege, it simply doesn't exist. But anti-whiteism does exist, whether it be, again, university admissions, whether it be access to jobs, and particularly in things like the public service. And now any business that sells services or goods to the government, any government, will be state, local, federal, and it's certainly in Australia and elsewhere, around the Western world, they must have a certain number of minorities, and preferences are given to businesses that have a large number of more minorities you have, the more you can access government contracts. So companies are absurdly just hiring lots of minorities, just as tokens, just window dressing, just so they can have access to government projects. And I see it even at our level, which is, I've got a share in a business. It's not a huge business, so it doesn't employ thousands of people or anything. And even we see it that preference is openly and brazenly given to businesses that are owned by black women, for example, or that have black women on the board of directors, or these sorts of things, or have black lesbians, openly, brazenly done. We don't win contracts simply because our upper management are all straight white males, and get sort of snotty questions. I suppose you're all Christians as well. That sort of attitude we get back from particularly the government or bigger bureaucratic organisations. So anti-whiteism is rampant everywhere. Now, it's done through affirmative act. Primarily, the devices through which it's done are affirmative action and race gender quotas, and propaganda that falsely accuses straight white men, particularly Christians, of being the source of all societal problems, whether it be fascist Nazis are everywhere, white supremacy, all these sorts of things that are elusive, that no one can see or define, and the huge effort put in by the state. If there's going to be any sort of gathering of straight white males anywhere, the Western governments are all over it, and they've got agitators and infiltrators in there to try and encourage some sort of illegal behaviour, and they put resources, money into it. We'll provide the trucks and the transport, and we'll provide this and that. To try and egg on and coax, and then the authorities swoop in and go, there, you see, neo-Nazis everywhere. Or if there's a march going somewhere, a Secret Service agent will be handed a swastika flag, and then we'll join the march, and then there'll be plenty of media attention given to that. All these sorts of things, the setups, the false flags, the choreography, the coordination of negative propaganda and all that sort of stuff. But when the mass migration began, the people who were coming in from the third world in particular, they just couldn't compete. They couldn't get jobs on merit. They either couldn't speak the language, or their qualifications were they didn't have any, or they'd had some third world bullshit qualifications that they got because they bribed somebody anyway. They had no job experience. They'd never worked. Even people who supposedly work, like Indians and so on, who worked in family businesses, the family business was a fucking monopoly. It wasn't, you had to go and compete and be good and so on. And so they had minions and flunkies doing the work, and the owner, the family, the owners of the business, just put on their designer label clothes and swanned around to look important and to aggrandize themselves. They didn't do any work or have any experience. So when they arrived, their resume says 5 years doing this, but they didn't fucking do anything. And I hired some of these people, so I can tell you firsthand. I hired, this is some years ago, I hired like a purchasing officer, and she was quite cheap to hire. So even though when these migrants began arriving, force-fed by the globalist controlled governments of the West, when these migrants began arriving, some of them had reasonably impressive CVs. And they were willing to work for wages that were less than a local person would want to get paid. So I hired this like purchasing manager or procurement manager, as you'd call it today. And she had quite an impressive CV. Once she starts work, you realise she hasn't got a clue. She doesn't know, one day from another. She's never had a day of work in her life. She sort of sits there, and she just wants to go through the motions, just move paper back and forth across a desk or this sort of thing. And she's got no concept of you actually have to do. You're being paid to do work. So she. You sort of work out that she's got a degree, but the family's quite influential, so that the degree was got through bribery. The only reason she went to university is to find a husband. That's where the elites in India, or that part of India at least, that's just where the boys and the girls go when they're 18 and 19 to sort of find a husband or a wife, and the elites to make sort of networking connections. They're not there to actually do any work or study anything or get a qualification they've earned. And I think this was the same university that when in the 1970s they hired a dean for the university from, I think it was England, and he said from now on there could be no cheating in exams, and they had a riot in the university because they weren't allowed to cheat. So this gives you an idea in these third world corrupt countries how things are done. So, and she worked for the business, and she had all the key words of the stuff that were needed. Was clearly her accent was very thick, but she clearly was someone of sophistication and so on. So anyway, she gets the job, and she hasn't got a clue, doesn't it? And it comes out in the wash. Well, actually, I attended the family business, and I had a nice office, and I looked important, but I didn't actually do any work. I actually don't know, anything about this at all. The claims made on the CV. I just, on my CV, I told you what you wanted to hear. It's your fault. It's your fault if you believed me. It was her attitude. The degree I got, but I'm entitled to a degree because I come from a prestigious family, or family has some prestige in the local area. So I'm entitled to a degree. That's a badge of prestige that all Indians of my class must have and should have and do have. So you white boy, you think it means that I actually studied for something, but I didn't. It's just a social honor badge. It's not an indication of what I studied or what I learned. So I had to move on. So look, it's not working out. You haven't got a clue. And not only that, she was quite lazy. She was attending the office, and her social prestige was what she brought with her because of her family. And the idea that she'd actually do work was, I remember she looked at me quite quizzically. You expect me to do work? You're kidding, right? No. And so she had to go. And things I've mentioned previously about hiring, PhD computer programmers and coders. Again, the same sort of thing. So when we look at this first tranche of immigrants that came to Australia, or to the West generally, they couldn't compete to get jobs. They just couldn't. Either they couldn't speak the language, or again, they had no experience, and it was always better to hire a local sort of born and bred, or at least local educated person, because they arrived at work believing that they had to do work, and that they must be qualified to do that work and have some experience at it, or be willing to learn, or those sorts of things. And the immigrants had none of that. The Indians were, well, why should I do that? Why should I have to learn something? And the people from Africa and so on, no, you're wasting your time. So the reality was, and this is reflected in government reports that are kept quiet and not announced in the media, by the way, that only 5% of the immigrant intake are actually ready to walk into a job and can be integrated into Australian society. 5%, and even that's considered to be rather generous. So it's probably less than that in reality. Nearly all of those that, bear in mind, the sort of 92% of the immigration rate are black and brown people, and only 8% are other white people. And the other white people are like even white people from South America, for example, or elsewhere, those sorts of things. So it's white in as much as they're not brown or black. But only so most of the people that are integratable come from this group, which means that the vast majority of these people are just unemployable. So without government regulations to force companies to employ them, then they're not going to get jobs, and that would create a mass situation where you have nearly every immigrant that comes in is brought in by the globalist machine is unemployable. So by creating the affirmative action and race gender quotas to actually make sure and guarantee these people get jobs, there's two things happen. One is the standard is lowered. So, okay, well, in order to give these people jobs, we have to lower the standard as they do for university admissions. So you don't have to get 50% in your test. 15% in the test is good enough. And if you can claim more hardship than that, we'll let you get a degree on the basis of you got 0 in the exam, or that we won't even give you an exam. We'll just give you the fucking degree, and we'll just give you the job. But it's not a case where every job that these people are being given is a new job created. It means that white people are not getting these jobs. So white people that can do the job and are qualified and are prepared to do the work are being denied jobs, being denied places at universities, being denied some, and also in legal contest. If black and brown people are encouraged, funded, they're given tax dollars to litigate against white people, and they're being dragged into court. White people are being dragged into courts where the outcome is predetermined on the basis of ideology, and where if a climate change protest where they shut down the whole city, and yet the police don't arrest anybody, or if they do, the courts let them off with a slap on the wrist. But supposedly some guys dressed in black were going through a train station a while ago in Australia. The whole train station claimed massive police presence because the Nazis, and yet it looked very choreographed as far as I could see. All these people dressed in black in exactly the same uniforms, or looking like it's just come out of the packaging, or walking along in as if they're performing for the camera. So this idea of white people being unwelcome and needed to be controlled in their own country, whereas other people can, anyone involved with societal dislocation is given a free pass. I see all that as anti-whiteism, and certainly anti-white male. Similarly, if you look at say Christians who pray silently outside an abortion clinic, whether you agree or not with abortion, but Christians praying silently at an abortion clinic, they're arrested by SWAT teams, whereas people in full body armor chasing after some Christian white guy, for goodness sakes. And meanwhile, the climate change, Black Lives Matter, Antifa can be torching buildings and beating people up and creating mayhem. Nah, no one touches them. They're okay. So this is all part of the wider anti-whiteism thing. So the reality is that everybody has to be equal before the law, and everybody has to meet a meritorious standard to make it into college, or to make it through junior high school to senior high school, to get a job. Completely impartial, independent, due legal process that treats your whether you're a black, lesbian or not as irrelevant. Did you or did you not commit the crime, or was a crime committed against you? The law, the evidence, that's all that matters. And this idea of having to redress imbalances. I mean, there was a black activist on one of the American talk shows, or a number of them actually. There's quite a few of these people, and they said, well, because of slavery 400 years ago, and because black people were denied this or something, 500 years ago, then we have to deny all these things to white people today, and that'll somehow equalize out you've got to be insane to have that attitude. So these things have to go, and I regard those as blatant and brazen anti-whiteism. So when President Trump talks about turning back, stopping anti-whiteism, then I see it everywhere. Now, whether I'm directly affected or not is another matter. Or whether it impacts me to any great extent, that's hardly the point. The point is that we should all be equal under the law, and codified law must be sovereign. And the opposing anti-whiteism, or hopefully eradicating it, means that it'll push the ideology out of the public space and out of the public discourse, and indeed out of education systems and so on, and that's a good thing. And I hope it happens. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.